firewall their ports of entry. Bitcoin and stablecoins start to pierce into that. And so you'd expect that over time, as liquidity and acceptance and knowledge of these types of technologies grow, particularly Bitcoin, it can pierce into all these things, and it's increasingly hard to maintain any sort of...
Expert financial analyst Lyn Alden has given her professional insights regarding the future of Bitcoin following the release of Bitcoin ETFs. As the influence of the crypto asset continues to expand, governments exert considerable effort to regulate and maintain control over their fiat currencies. In a podcast hosted by Peter McCormack, Lyn Alden talks about the possibility of hyper-Bitcoinization, where Bitcoin becomes the predominant form of money globally. According to Alden, there is a range of possible outcomes when it comes to the future of Bitcoin. She reminds us that money is a competitive good that thrives on network effects, suggesting a natural inclination for individuals to gravitate toward the best available form of money. The coexistence of two forms of money often arises when one alone is insufficient for various use cases. The unique characteristics of Bitcoin, such as decentralization and a capped supply, make it a potential alternative that individuals and entities may choose for specific transactions and store of value purposes, offering a distinct option in the evolving landscape of financial instruments. A significant aspect of her analysis involves the role of governments in maintaining their fiat currencies against the growing influence of Bitcoin. Alden also discusses how developing countries facing inflation issues can uphold their currency monopolies through technology. However, she anticipates that Bitcoin and stablecoins could challenge these monopolies. The decentralized nature of Bitcoin and the stability offered by certain stablecoins present alternatives that may gain traction as liquidity, acceptance, and technological awareness increase. Despite acknowledging the uncertainty surrounding the extent to which governments can resist this trend, Alden expresses high ambitions for Bitcoin's potential impact on the global monetary landscape. Now, let's take a look at some clips from the podcast as Alden expresses her insights on cryptocurrency scaling over time and the concept of self-sovereignty in a decentralized system. As you interact with our content, we invite you to show your appreciation by liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel. Don't forget to turn on notifications to stay informed about our insightful videos about the crypto space. Thank you for being so supportive. We hope you enjoy the video.
For when I got into Bitcoin, I had also been, watching it, studying it for a while. So I went through a phase where I was interested but skeptical, to interested and convicted. Right, that was a transition I went through. And what I find interesting is that a lot of people are kind of almost come off as constantly surprised by the scaling challenges, even though they were laid out in 2009, 2010. If you look at Satoshi's original emails even before Bitcoin was launched, just on the mailing list, people were challenging the scaling. They were like, well, how is this going to scale? Or, Hal Finney was talking about Bitcoin banks in 2010. And so this has been, there's actually an old joke that basically like any kind of thing you think about Bitcoin, it's all been discussed on Bitcoin Talk in the first couple of years. And this is just another one of those things that's been discussed since literally pre-inception of the chain. And so for me, it's when I got in, I had the benefit. The downside is you don't get in at like $10 Bitcoin, but the benefit is you have years of history of kind of people discussing this and seeing how it's worked and kind of understanding all the pros and cons of different approaches. So for me, it was understood from the beginning that it's going to scale in layers. And also when I look at the existing financial system, we see it scale in layers. So for example, there's FedWire. It's like the biggest, kind of US settlement system. It's operated by the Fed. They settle $1 quadrillion a year. So $1,000 trillion a year. And they do it with about as many transactions as Bitcoin does. So in a given year, they do 200 million transactions, average of 5 million each. And so you get $1 quadrillion in gross settlement, which sounds like a cartoonish number.
What are they settling? What kind of transactions?
Basically, a lot of a lot of bank stuff. Like basically when banks are settling between each other, it's going through FedWire essentially. So it's one of the main clearing mechanisms in the US. It's not the only one, but it's the biggest one. And so a lot of the things that we think of as like when we make a fiat payment, it's not really final. It's basically the banks have kind of agreed and then they settle on FedWire. And that's getting updated over time with FedNow and things like that. But basically it's like the underlying base chain. Centralization gives you some benefits. like efficiency.
Yeah.
But in that case, it's like this monopoly centralized settlement system.
Yeah.
And so Bitcoin is an open source global one. And so,
Which also needs a decentralized security.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so when I think about, like, you mentioned that transactions are expensive, and you referenced like $10, for example. Whereas, when I send wires to Egypt, for example, they generally cost more than $10, especially if I want them within a day or two.
Okay.
Generally, sometimes I'll have options. The longer I'm allowed to kind of let that sit, maybe they'll give me a discount. But if I want a transaction in a day, I might be paying $30, $35. And that's still going through centralized systems. It's just kind of different centralized systems doing all their handshake. Was self-sovereignty is a Platonic ideal. So for people that don't know the Platonic ideal jargon, it's basically something that's the ideal version of something that doesn't necessarily exist in nature. So a classic example is a perfect circle.
Yes.
We know what a perfect circle is. It's a geometric concept, but there's actually no perfect circles in nature. Nor even our machinery, we can't make an actual perfect circle. We can get really close, or a perfectly straight line, for example. So we know the conception of what a circle is. They don't actually exist. So when you think of self-sovereignty, you could actually argue that nobody's self-sovereign if you define it as strictly as possible, which is you get Bitcoin, you run the node, you verify it, you've audited every line of code in the node you're running, including every line of every library that code uses, which nobody's done. I don't think Satoshi's not done that, right? And
so there's a certain amount of trust.
Yeah. So you're always trusting something. You could be a very highly machined circle, but you're still not perfect. You can have practical, I would call it practical self-sovereignty. But even then, I mean, we live in a world where there have been bugs on Bitcoin. And, so far it's navigated through those, and there's fallback methods and things like that. But basically, everybody's doing some degree of trust. And so the question is how much.
As Lyn Alden discusses self-sovereignty in the context of Bitcoin, she highlights the ideal where individuals have complete and absolute control over their assets. However, she notes the practical challenges in achieving this ideal. In the case of Bitcoin, self-sovereignty involves running a full node, independently verifying transactions, and auditing every line of code in the node, including libraries. A highly meticulous and demanding task. Alden points out that achieving absolute trustlessness, where users don't need to trust any external factor, may be impractical in reality. Even in the Bitcoin ecosystem, users must trust certain elements, such as the code they run and the network's ability to navigate through potential bugs or vulnerabilities. She acknowledges that while practical self-sovereignty is achievable and desirable, it often involves a certain degree of trust in the system and its components. We will now bring you more clips from the podcast where Alden elaborates on her views regarding Bitcoin's evolution, misconceptions surrounding the asset, and its future. Enjoy the video.
And every 5 years, Bitcoin is better than it was 5 years prior.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it goes through these bulls and bear cycles. But for example, 5 years ago, Lightning wasn't really a thing, at least with any sort of liquidity usability. Nunchuck and Tap Signer weren't things. Fediment, and so a lot has happened in 5 years. Fundamentally, people often, when you talk to some macro person, like Bitcoin has no fundamentals, there's just a speculation. It's like, we just haven't done the work. The fundamentals are what's happening in the space, what's happening in the venture space, what's happening with the hubs. That's actually part of the fundamental analysis. If you can't name 5 Bitcoin hubs, you haven't done your fundamental work.
Look, people digging out 2017 arguments now just look like more. But now,
you go fast forward. A lot of those have been addressed, but they still repeat it. And I'm always quick to point out there are risks. I mean, there's risks in this space. And I had a whole chapter in my book dedicated to risks. So it's not to say I don't like the words inevitable or things like that. There's risks, but they are challenges and opportunities to mitigate those risks. And so it's not, going against the network effect of the dollar system is not easy. Any sort of challenger to any sort of major incumbent is hard, and this one is like the final boss. It's basically it's software is eaten so many other things, and going after the highly regulated centralized banking apparatus and state issued seigniorage, that's not easy. And the advantage is there's 200 different jurisdictions, 160 different currencies or so. And, any hub in these starts kind of building that network. Some of these big powers have pretty strong rule of law, at least decent rule of law. And you can challenge them. And death by 1,000 paper cuts, or I view it as optimism by 1,000 paper cuts. It's pushing back 1,000 little paper cuts at a time to make sure people's rights aren't being infringed and they have optionality. I think that optionality is a really key thing that is maybe not emphasized enough in the Bitcoin space. I think people who are on the vanguard of things tend to have black and white thinking.
Yeah.
Which is actually, it's not just a weakness. It can be like, you need black and white thinkers to rush in first. Like that's how radical change happens, is black and white thinkers. But then in addition to those warriors, you also want diplomats or people that can think in kind of more flexible ways. And I realize that, it's not all black and white.
Yep.
That the people that think in black and white are doing really valuable work, but that there's also really big design space here. And optionality is something that I think is really underrated, that you empower people more to choose when they want to trust, rather than giving them only one option. You have to, if you're living in Nigeria, before Bitcoin, stablecoins, things like that, and it's really hard to get dollars, like your only option is to trust the Nigerian central bank and the Nigerian banking network with your money. And this technology has made it so that you now have a lot more options for, whether you want to trust, or if you're in a position where you have to trust, at least you can choose where you're trusting. And then you can have ways to minimize how much you have to trust. And that spectrum is really powerful. And I think we're still only scratching the surface of what that looks like. I think that
Alden addresses the notion that Bitcoin lacks fundamentals, countering it by defining fundamentals in the cryptocurrency space as encompassing developments in the ecosystem, venture space, and the functionality of essential elements like hubs. She suggests that those dismissing Bitcoin as speculative often overlook these fundamental aspects. Optionality, according to Alden, is an underrated aspect, allowing individuals to choose when and where to place their trust. Alden sees Bitcoin and other technologies as providing more options for individuals to manage and minimize their trust in centralized entities, envisioning a broader design space for these possibilities in the future. Do you agree with Lyn Alden's insights? And what aspects of Bitcoin's future are you most excited about or concerned with? Your perspectives are valuable. We invite you to share your thoughts in the comment section below. If you found value in Lyn's expert insights, kindly express your appreciation by clicking the like button, sharing this video within your crypto community, and subscribing to our channel for more insightful discussions. Ensure you have notifications enabled to stay informed about our latest content, where we provide expert perspectives on the digital world of crypto finance. Thank you for being a part of our community. Until our next engagement, stay informed, stay empowered, and approach the future of finance with an open mind.